These are by far the most beautiful roses you have.
Your Highness, the entire palace has started whispering that the princess spends more time talking to the window cleaner than to her own husband. The servant lowered her head immediately after speaking, but the words lingered in the room long after she fell silent. Prince Edward looked up from the documents covering his desk and almost dismissed the rumor as nonsense. His wife was Princess Amelia. She was admired throughout the kingdom, respected by foreign diplomats, and beloved by the public. The idea that she would rather spend her afternoons speaking with a maintenance worker than with the future king sounded absurd. Yet the longer he thought about it, the less absurd it became, because he could not remember the last meaningful conversation he had shared with his wife, not a discussion about royal duties, not a greeting before breakfast, not a polite exchange during a public appearance, a real conversation, one where they spoke openly and listened carefully, and suddenly, the rumor no longer felt insulting. It felt painfully possible. When Amelia married Edward 7 years earlier, she had believed she was marrying her best friend. In those early years, they could spend entire evenings talking about books, dreams, and the future they hoped to build together. But as Edward's responsibilities grew, those conversations became shorter, then rarer, until they disappeared almost entirely. The distance between them did not arrive through arguments. It arrived through neglect. And neglect was far quieter. At first, Amelia tried to bridge the gap. She told Edward about the charities she supported. She invited him to walk through the palace gardens. She left books on his desk with notes tucked between the pages. But eventually she stopped. Not because she stopped loving him, because she grew tired of speaking to someone who never seemed to hear her. One rainy afternoon, Amelia met Daniel, a palace window cleaner, after he accidentally dropped a cleaning cloth beside her chair in the conservatory. What began as an awkward apology slowly became a casual friendship. Daniel asked questions, and more importantly, he remembered the answers. When Amelia mentioned a novel she loved, he asked about the ending days later. When she spoke about a charity project, he wanted to know whether it had succeeded. When she pointed out her favourite roses in the palace garden, he remembered exactly where they grew. It was such a simple thing. Yet Amelia realised she had missed it desperately. Being listened to. Weeks later, Edward attended a royal luncheon with several aristocratic families. The conversation was light until an elderly duchess suddenly smiled and said, "Your Highness, I heard the princess's favourite roses finally bloomed this spring." Edward politely nodded. Then the duchess added, "They're the white English roses near the East Garden, aren't they?" The window cleaner mentioned she visits them almost every afternoon. The table fell quiet. Edward stared at his plate, because he had no idea which flowers his wife loved. Nobleman laughed awkwardly. At least someone pays attention. The comment was not meant to be cruel, yet it landed like a slap. For the remainder of the luncheon, Edward barely heard another word. That evening he found himself standing at a palace window watching Amelia walk through the gardens. Below, Daniel was there. The two were speaking near the rose bushes. Then Amelia laughed. The sound drifted faintly through the open window. Edward froze. He could not remember the last time he had made her laugh like that, and suddenly a terrible thought crossed his mind. The man standing beside his wife knew which flowers she loved. Meanwhile, her husband did not. For the first time in years, Edward began paying attention. He noticed the books stacked beside her bed, the sketches she kept, hidden in drawers, the evenings she spent alone in the library, the countless invitations she had extended over the years that he had declined without a second thought. And the more he noticed, the worse he felt, because Amelia had never stopped reaching for him. He had simply stopped reaching back. A few days later, Edward found Amelia sitting alone in the library. Instead of walking past, he sat down across from her. She looked surprised. "What are you reading?" he asked. Amelia stared at him for several seconds before answering. The conversation started awkwardly, but gradually became easier. For nearly an hour they talked about books, travel, and memories from the early years of their marriage. For the first time in a very long while, it felt natural. Then Edward quietly asked the question that had been haunting him. "Why didn't you tell me you were unhappy?" Amelia lowered her eyes. A sad smile appeared on her face. "Edward, I did. The words immediately tightened something in his chest. I told you when I invited you to walk with me. She looked down at the book in her hands. I told you when I left. Notes on your desk. Her voice remained calm. I told you when I waited for you at dinner. Then she looked at him, and I told you. Every time I tried to start a conversation, Edward felt his stomach sink. Because she was right. She had told him. For years, he simply hadn't listened. Several weeks later, Daniel was transferred to another royal estate. Before leaving, he asked to say goodbye. When Amelia thanked him for his friendship, he smiled and said something she would never forget. I don't think I helped you as much as you think, Your Highness. Amelia looked confused. Daniel glanced toward the palace where Edward was waiting. I think I just reminded someone how lucky he already was. That evening, Edward and Amelia sat together in the gardens as the sun disappeared behind the palace walls. For a while they spoke about nothing important. Books, flowers, the changing weather, the sort of conversation they once would have considered ordinary. Now it felt precious. Finally, Edward turned toward her. I'm sorry, Amelia remained quiet. I spent years believing I was providing everything you needed, he continued. The palace, security, stability. His voice softened. And somehow I never realized the one thing you wanted most was my attention. For a moment neither spoke. Then Amelia reached for his hand. Not because the hurt had disappeared, not because the lost years could be erased, but because for the first time in a very long while, she believed he was truly listening. As the evening breeze moved gently through the palace gardens, Edward listened while Amelia spoke about books, flowers, and all the little things she had kept inside for years. And for the first time in a very long time, she no longer felt lonely sitting beside her husband. Because the greatest gift Daniel had given her was not friendship. It was helping her husband find his way back to her. And sometimes, the person who saves a marriage isn't the one who stays, but the one who reminds two people how much they still matter to each other. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional royal stories filled with love, heartbreak, and unforgettable life lessons.